Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us this evening on our webinar that was very kindly supported by SuperValu. So this is a partnership that AsIAm has with SuperValu to provide support to the autism community, autistic people and their family members in a variety of different areas and different topics. So the topic that we are going to be providing information for you on tonight is supporting disability service users during this very strange and unprecedented time, I suppose. So we're delighted tonight to be joined by Darragh Byrne of Gheel and Andy McDonnell and Paul Phillips of Studio 3. So we're not only delighted that they have given up their time on this quite dreary Wednesday night. It is Wednesday, isn't it? All these days are just kind of blended into one at the moment. But not only giving up their time, but also offering us their expertise. So we're honoured to have you. Thank you so much. Just to give you an idea of the format and how this is going to work tonight. So for the first 30 minutes, we will be hearing from Darragh. And then for the second 30-minute time slot, we'll be hearing from both Andy and Paul from Studio 3. If you look down at the bottom of the screen and hover your mouse, you'll see a Q&A box. So please feel free to type in any questions that you might have during the course of the session. Some of those questions we might be able to type an answer to. Anybody who is on the panel right now will be able to answer, but some of those questions we might flag and then answer verbally at the end of the session if we have time, which we should have. But just to let you know that that's how that works, and please don't enter them into the chat box. If you can enter them into the Q&A, that's one way of maintaining confidentiality and keeping them anonymous. But I'm not going to chat on any further. I'm going to hand over now to Darragh. So Darragh, you have the ability to share your screen there if you want to, or if you just rather chat, that's up to yourself. But thank you so much.
Share the screen. Okay. Let me just try and get this onto the slideshow. Okay. Okay. Can you all see this screen in front of you with the slide? Okay. I'll get started. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Adam, Fiona, Nicola, and everybody at AsIAm for putting on this event, for continuing to do fantastic work, putting on events such as this. It was an honor to be asked, so I really want to thank you for that. Secondly, it would be remiss of me not to mention my amazing colleagues at Gheel Autism Services, many of whom I spoke to while I was preparing for today. They have really done some phenomenal work through what has been a really strange and challenging and extraordinary time for us, for everybody involved. We're so lucky to have some incredibly creative staff, and this pandemic has really, I guess it's really brought and a lot of other colleagues that when we put our mind to something, it creates something pretty incredible. And you'll find out all about that very shortly, exactly some of the stuff we've done. I'm very privileged that I'm the one that gets to sit here in front of all of you guys and tell you all about it, but the people that I work with are the ones that have really done all the work. So I just hope that I can do them justice. So what am I going to be discussing? So I'm going to be 7 months of trying to deliver services through this pandemic, through COVID-19. And I'm really going to be sharing some practical tips and creative ideas that you can take on if you wish. You know, you may get some ideas from it for your home, for your workplace, wherever it might be. So we're just sharing some of the stuff that we've done in the hope that it might benefit you in some way. So if we just look at reflections on the last 7 months, and it's only really now, I think, that we're looking back on that period and going, God, what a strange time, just taking in the whole period. It all happened so fast in the beginning, and it took us all by surprise, but it's only now that we're looking back. So some of the things that I've discussed with my colleague are, there's been a huge amount of change, and we know obviously that change and unpredictability is very difficult for the people that we support, and they like to know what's going to happen. They like to know, they like predictability, and we've had enormous changes. We've had lockdowns. We've levels at the moment. We've got 5 levels, but we haven't really been on any of the 5 levels yet, because we seem to be on mixtures of some of them. And I think, you know, our government sent out these information bulletins and stuff, and the news will tell us what each level means, but we don't seem to end up on any of them wholly. So I think that's been hugely challenging for people, because things keep on changing. I think a lot of the visits in obviously have been restricted hugely. Family members coming in, parents coming in, and visits home as well have been affected. I think it's been extremely difficult for older parents. So we have to acknowledge that it really has been. Some of the people that we support are very used to and really rely on going home to see family. And when that wasn't allowed to happen, that was very, very difficult for them. A lot of our staff have commented that the restrictions that were imposed on the general public, I suppose, have given them a much deeper appreciation for the restrictive practices in our service. Many of, we do, like most services, have restrictive practices that exist, and I think our staff this gave them extra time to think differently about it, because there was restrictions imposed on them as well for a change. Change, I think if we're all honest, change can be quite slow in disability services, but we feel that COVID it's already led to more innovative, more creative practices. I think it's made us much better as a service. It's made us much better at being support staff. It's certainly speeded up the change process quicker than it ordinarily would if we were trying to change things, and we're always trying to change things, and it's definitely brought the best out in our services. Some of our staff, interestingly, have admitted that they initially, I think when the restrictions started, they had lower expectations on the ability of the people that we support to cope with the challenges that COVID-19 has imposed on us. We need to, I think we need to have, and I think we will have going forward, much higher expectations for them in all areas of their life. We need to assume that they are going to be okay. I think there's a tendency sometimes to wrap them up in bubble wrap and do things very, very slowly. But when change happens, they're much better at dealing with it than we gave them credit for. And of course, change can be good because it can lead to the development of good coping skills. And I certainly think that's another thing that has happened during the past 7 months. It hasn't been easy, of course, and we know that some people have struggled and continue to struggle with the change. And I'm going to discuss that a little later as well. But it definitely has led to good coping skills. The environment that we provide our support in, our day centres, our residential services, everywhere has become much quieter, much calmer, and there were much less demands on people because they weren't able to go the places they normally were, or the places what we normally would have taken them, or things that they would have done. And this in turn led to a reduction in arousal levels. And maybe this is something that Andy and Paul are going to discuss. And in turn, it led to a real significant decrease in the number of incidents that we had, because people were calmer. So we have to learn a lot from that as well as staff members. Some further reflections. Some of the people that we support, and they've said it, they definitely preferred life, elements of life during restrictions. And I suppose it's different for everybody, but a lot of them did prefer that it was quieter, that it was calmer, that there was less people coming in and out all the time, and it suited them. Restrictions kind of forced our families in a way to purchase IT equipment. Now we've been asking a lot of them for a while to do this, but as a result of, I guess, the restrictions that happened and the visits having to stop, they did purchase some IT equipment. They purchased tablets, they purchased laptops, home computers, and then their IT knowledge improved as a result very, very quickly because it had to. So this meant that we could have Skype calls, Zoom calls home when no visits in or home were allowed. And that was a huge benefit to this. Something that maybe would have taken years ordinarily to get around. The IT knowledge of our staff also hugely increased. And the people that we support, because they started to engage with this technology as well. Our meetings went from face to face, where we would have to drive across the city, drive to Kildare to get to meetings, when Microsoft Teams was available to us all, and now we use on a daily basis. And I think that's something that we're definitely going to continue to use. That's been a huge help to us. It's been a huge benefit. And it meant that we could become much more efficient because we could meet each other without having the travel time. The health needs, unfortunately, of the people that we support was something that wasn't able to be prioritized. And our work on things like projects like Aging in Place and stuff were delayed significantly. So that was definitely a downside to all of this. I think what was a really interesting point, and something that only came up recently, is that we completely underestimated the impact that the restrictions have had on relationships amongst the people that we support. So amongst different clients, different service users. And there may have been maybe one or two individuals that maybe they may not have, or they could not have articulated just how meaningful the relationships were for them with the other people that they maybe were in the same day service with, or someone that they saw quite regularly, because maybe they never appeared to pay much attention to each other, or we certainly didn't really realize that there was much of a relationship going on. But when it was taken away, or when it wasn't able to happen, we saw that these people got extremely upset, and we didn't think it was an issue until afterwards. So sometimes I guess you don't know what you've got till it's gone, but we will not underestimate this again. So that was a really interesting thing that happened. I think this time was an opportunity to explore new interests with people. And one of my colleagues said to me, just because somebody said no to something in the past, it doesn't mean that the mind will never change, or they'll never want to engage in it in the future. Everything is dependent on context. So we have to keep giving people opportunities to say yes to things. And I think that's definitely something that happened. And this definitely was a very, very different context. So a lot of things that people said no to in the past, all of a sudden they were saying yes to now. So again, we have to give people time to change their minds. I think we are all still adjusting to what's a new normal, as Fiona said. But I think as service providers, what the future will be for us is definitely a hybrid of the past, pre-COVID, and the present during COVID. And a lot of the technology that we use now, we're certainly going to use. So it'll be a bit of a mix of both: face-to-face meetings with service users, because a lot of that had to happen. We weren't able to see people. A lot of online sessions. So Skype calls, Zoom calls, FaceTimes, all that had to happen. And I think some people did prefer that. Other people that we support do not really like that medium of interaction. They prefer the face-to-face. So some had a lot less interaction with us online, and some had even more interaction with us online. And it's probably going to stay that way. So that's been hugely interesting. So on the practical tips side, one of the things that we did an analysis in relation to quality of life. This is hugely important for us as a service. Of all the people that we support, we look closely at the areas where individuals themselves placed a value. So that was very important as well. Where those individuals, what was important to them, where they placed value. So there were things like visits home for some people are extremely important, visits to coffee shops, getting exercise and walks in, socializing with peers, socializing with family. Our aim was to see if there was any way that we could replicate the valued activity that was lost or as a result of the restrictions imposed by COVID. So that was something that we set out to do in the very, very beginning, and that gave us a real focus. And when day services were closed as well, we had to try to replicate what the day center had, and maybe people didn't have access to at home. So a lot of people, we have swings in a lot of our day services and stuff that people wouldn't have at home. So we had to try to see, well, was there any way, because the individual couldn't come into the service, was there any way we could replicate that? And one of the things was using skipping ropes, because it can, to a certain degree, replicate the effect of a swing. So that was something that we were able to use with certain individuals. Technology played a huge role, as I said. We were able to support people using technology, using Skype, Zoom, FaceTime, with helping people to complete college assignments, giving people practical information, because a lot of them went on to the pandemic unemployment payment support scheme, so helping them with the forms. We delivered home exercise classes to people over Zoom. We did cooking demonstrations. We used it as a way to interact with families. We ran social groups with individuals. So we would say, look, does anybody want to try a social group on a certain topic, and what topics might people like? So we've social groups created now in WWE, in Dungeons and Dragons, and they're running very, very successfully online, which is just incredible. It forced people to set up email addresses. People that we support that we've been trying for a long time to get you onto email, and they were reluctant to do so. This kind of forced them to do that, and it's meant that we have another method of communication that they quite enjoy now. So that's been positive. we feel, and it really was, communication was absolutely critical throughout the service, right from the beginning, in order for us to be able to stay ahead of issues that might happen. We were always planning, we were always meeting. We developed a COVID response team from the beginning, made up of members from across Gheel, and the information was then always being fed down through team meetings down to every one of our staff members, and also to the people that we support as well. And I'll discuss that shortly with you too. We ran surveys, so we did a lot of survey monkeys with the people that we support and with our families as well. And we got some really interesting feedback, which I'm going to go through with you shortly now as well. Really good feedback. Something that we were very determined to do. We wanted to make sure that people had opportunities to give positive and negative feedback so that we could learn from them and make the service better. We created videos and created picture boards on practical things like hand washing, wearing of masks, cough etiquette, and so on, which our service users and our staff members as well found extremely helpful, rather than just reading about these. So that was definitely a good tip, I would say, if you haven't already done it. Some of the feedback that we received from the surveys that we sent out, they were very interesting. One of my colleagues, Emmett, sent a survey out to they run a transition support group for adults with mostly Asperger type autism. So some of these are I just handpicked some of the quotes out of it. The feedback in general was extremely positive about the staff on Emmett's team, deservedly so. But it really showed us that although they were kind of holding it together, they were dealing with it. They were also many of them were struggling hugely with it. So this is the first quote. Somebody said, "It's the same as before, and I think it's still helpful. I still get to see my caseworker on FaceTime on my phone. I love doing it because we can see each other and talk about things." So us being able to have that method of communication was extremely important. Another person said, it's been upsetting of my routine. I'm feeling burnout quite a bit. I've emotional ups and downs. My executive functioning has been an issue. I'm finding it difficult to organize and follow through on plans that I make. My anxiety and focus have been an issue. Motivation is difficult to maintain, and I'm worrying about deadlines and presentations. So that was a common theme as well. So people were extremely stressed through this, obviously, but they giving them the opportunity to express that we felt was really important. Again, I said the feedback to our staff was absolutely phenomenal, and there was really nice comments, things like, "Treat yourselves to something nice. You've all been wonderful. Thank you so much." So that was great to hear as well. But it was very important to us to carry out those surveys. So what did we do during this period to keep people active so that we could, continue to meet the needs of the people that we support? So these are just some of the things that we did. So we created for all the people that we support, and we kept them on display in very visible places. We in one particular area, and not just one, in many areas, we carried out COVID meetings with service users each week. So in one particular place, they generally have a few meetings a week, but every Tuesday was set aside for a COVID meeting. So they created easy read agendas, they created easy read minutes afterwards, and they displayed them in a very prominent place in the house. And they had another meeting with residents every Saturday, and that was to talk about everything else but COVID, because they were a bit burned out by talking about COVID a lot. So one meeting specifically for COVID and one for anything else but. But I think that creating those documents was hugely important to educating people on why this was happening. You can't just impose restrictions, change people's lives hugely without giving them the information. So we had to give lots and lots of information so that they could understand the reasons for all of the restrictions and why they couldn't do the things that they normally could do. And I have to say the vast majority of the people they support, like I said, were incredible through all of this and continue to be. One particular
Hi everybody, sorry about that. We seem to have dropped Darragh from the stream. I think he must have poor internet connection. I think what we might do is pass over now to Andy and Paul, if that's okay. And then if we do manage to get Darragh back, we can finish the last 10 minutes or so of his presentation at the end. Is that okay with you, Andy and Paul?
Absolutely. I think bizarrely, it might work quite well. We can fill in the meat and the sandwich, and we'll make sure there's time for Darragh internet being the internet, because I think a lot of things he was saying were so relevant to what we want to get over as well. So
brilliant, that's great. So I'll hand over to you both now, if that's okay. And if you can pick up then, and hopefully we'll get Darragh back at some point.
Yes. Well, really, first of all, good evening. Obviously, it is a privilege to be talking here this evening, and I was speaking particularly to my colleagues about this today, about AsIAm as a charity and the way we've wanted to support you over the years. Bizarrely as well, in the past, I was also a clinical psychologist for Gheel for many parts of my career. So it's actually a pleasure to hear Darragh talk about Gheel, which is an organisation that I'm very biased about in terms of they really do try and put individualisation into supporting people on the spectrum. And I thought we got a really good glimpse there from the beginning of the situation we're in with COVID. And I think the idea about innovation is certainly something we would share. I'm actually just trying to make sure, I think my colleague Paul has gone to the toilet, so I'm just trying to make sure that I can get hold of him in a second. Otherwise, we'll be doing this without PowerPoints, which is no big deal either. But basically, we're asked tonight to give a very short reflection on the process and where we are. Oh, Darragh's back. Good. Hopefully, I can pause then, Fiona.
Hello.
Back. Yeah, you're back on, Darragh. So,
sorry, guys, I don't know what happened there.
You're okay, don't worry.
There's still joy. So I'm going to mute again. I think you should carry on in flow, Fiona, where I find out whether my colleague's gone to the toilet.
That's a good idea. Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, guys.
Will I go back to it, so?
If you don't mind, that would be great.
Absolutely,
yeah, we hadn't really progressed much further. So if you were able to just pick up, that'd be fantastic.
Absolutely. So I was saying, did I leave you at this point, or did I leave you sooner? I'm not sure.
I think it was a slide before this, possibly, or else a slide after.
Okay, so these were the care packages.
Yes, it was this slide, yeah.
Okay, so in order for us to, I guess when we couldn't see family members, this became a hugely important thing. So one of the residential houses within Gheel used to create these care packages. They refer to them as that. So where there'd be the individual themselves would put in a picture of themselves, some chocolates, some artwork that they created, wrap it up in a lovely box and send it home with a card to their parents. And the feedback that we got from the families was absolutely tremendous. They took huge comfort in it, and they were so grateful. So that was a great initiative. There's a huge amount of gardening that took place. I suppose we were lucky with the weather during the time. It was fantastic. One of the residential houses created a sensory garden, which they're still working on, but it looks absolutely phenomenal. There was planting going on. There was people getting stuck in, which was absolutely brilliant. And it became a great resource for us. One of our service users took to a thing called tree graffiti, which was a new one for me, where you do knitting, and you basically go out and you put the things that you've made around trees in your local area to bring a bit of color to the place. So she really enjoyed that activity, and the place looks absolutely brilliant. There was an initiative set up in one of our residential houses called the Golden Gheels, which is an absolutely brilliant name, but it was basically where we had social meetups from people that we support from across the service, people that maybe used to be in a particular day service with each other in times past, but maybe haven't seen them in a long time and weren't able to see them through some of the restrictions, or people that they were used to seeing in different places and couldn't see them any longer. And this also took place through Skype and Zoom when we weren't able to see them face to face. So that was an absolutely phenomenal thing that still happens. So that's the Golden Gheels. Obviously, places which are the people that we support were used to going. So cinemas obviously were closed. So we created a cinema in one of our offices, which got a lot of use. We created a shop. Obviously, the shop was extremely important for some people, coffee shops, and the local mini market as well. So we created a shop in another one of our offices that our service user could go to. Again, it just replaced a strong value for them, and enabled us to meet a need that was still there. It wasn't important to us as well, I think, to once the restrictions were eased and the real shop opened up again, that we closed these ones that we had, like, and the cinema as well, because we didn't, I guess, when the real version existed, we didn't want people to become too dependent on the one that we created. We still wanted to get them out in the community. So it was important for us to be able to do that. And that would be a good tip that I pass on to anybody else as well. One particular gentleman that we support, Sean, in our Minute service, he loved nothing more than a pint in his local pub of a Tuesday evening. And when that wasn't possible, we, when you can't take the man to the pub, as one of my colleagues said, you need to take the pub to the man. So we created a makeshift bar in another one of our offices in Minute. Again, it was hugely beneficial to this young man, and it had other uses as well, but he was able to go in, have a can instead of a pint, and watch his sport, which he dearly loved, and it kept him happy, which was the most important thing for us. A lot of exercise happened, and a lot of it happened outdoors. Obviously it had to, but some of it happened online as well. So some of my colleagues, is Brendan here, top left, doing some instructional videos for people that he supports. We had circuit training, we ran mindfulness sessions, we ran yoga sessions. You can see in the bottom, in the middle here of the slide, one of my colleagues created a 3-month exercise plan for the team that he supports. And again, all of this was extremely helpful for people's mental health, for people's physical health. And it was absolutely brilliant, and people really, really enjoyed it. So there was lots and lots of that happening. There was cooking demonstrations happening all over the place. There was these amazing instructional videos that we were, live videos that we were able to run with people who wanted to learn how to make certain meals. Obviously, we know McDonald's is a hugely important place for a lot of people with autism, and that might be a stereotype, but I think it's true. So when obviously McDonald's was closed, which it was for a long time, that was hugely distressing for a lot of people. So one of our staff very creatively set about making a McDonald's, and here you can see the image of the Big Mac, which looks exactly like a Big Mac. But that went down extremely well, and it's just these small things that are important to people that we were able to maintain. One of the incredible things that happened is my colleague Colin, who manages our Southside Transition Service, when the restrictions were announced and it became evident that we weren't going to be able to deliver services in the same way, he sat down with his team, and the team decided that the best thing that they could do, and there was huge agreement with this, is that they were going to set up a project that everybody could be involved in, that would give them a focus, that would get them through this, that would motivate the staff, that would motivate the people that they supported in that team. One of the people that they support in that team is called Jake, and Jake is absolutely passionate about music. He adores it. It's so important to him. He refers to himself as DJ Toffo, which you can see up here on the top left, and he basically creates music, and they were very lucky to be able to team up with a music producer based in New York called Xander Goodhart. And Xander really thought this was a phenomenal project. And they decided that he'd already worked with Jake on a previous project, on a song that Jake created called Jake is Great, which you can see on YouTube if you search for DJ Toffo. It's an absolutely brilliant song. But they decided that they were going to come up with a charity single. So this became the project for this team. The song is called Sun Will Come Back Around. The huge amount of work has gone into this, and it's absolutely phenomenal with what they've been able to achieve these past 7 months, and how beneficial it's been for everybody in that team, not just Jake. So the single is going to be released on the 2nd of November. So in a few weeks' time, it'll be released on Spotify, Apple Music, and on all social media outlets. Hopefully, it'll get a lot of airplay on the radio as well. And it's all in aid of the Gheel Community Fund, which is an initiative set up by Gheel, where there'll be an I Donate page set up on our website, where you can donate money, because we won't make money from the single. So any money that's donated by, or that's made through donations, will go directly to the people that we support for initiatives, for projects that they want to have in their service. So it will, all of the money raised will go directly to the people that we support, and only the people that we support. So I'd encourage you all to look out for Jake's single, The Sun Will Come Back Around. Like, he's put a huge amount of work into it. It's a brilliant song. So they were due to have a launch night in November, which is obviously going to be delayed now with restrictions, but some of the other people that they support in that team are going to do various things on that launch night. So everybody has a role. Some of them are creating artwork. Some of them are doing a bake sale to raise money. Some of them, one of the guys is very interested in health and safety, so he's going to be the COVID officer on the night as well. So everybody has a role, and that was a brilliant thing for that team that has kept them going through a very difficult time. There's a very, very impressive young man who's in the same team, actually. His name is Adrian Luke. Adrian is really passionate about being an autism advocate, and he already is one. He loves giving talks to people, to colleges, to anybody really. He loves spreading the message. He loves spreading awareness about autism. And when Adrian wasn't going to be able to do that because of the restrictions, he decided that he was going to create a podcast series spreading awareness about autism. And he's done just that. And he's 2 episodes in. Again, you can go to YouTube and you can look up Adrian Luke and you can listen to his podcasts. I was incredibly honored to be part of his 2nd episode, where Adrian wanted to discuss a special interest in autism, which is an area that's very close to his heart. So you can go on there and listen, and Adrian is doing an absolutely phenomenal job. He has a very, very bright future. So Adam needs to watch out because Adrian is coming. I'm going to leave you now with a poem, which one of the service users that has been with us for a long time, Owen Sheedy. He's very, very creative. He's very talented. He's a great writer. And I think his poem is extremely apt. So I'm going to leave you with this poem, and then I'll hand over to Andy and Paul. So it's called Something in the Air. I'm going to just have to change the look of my screen so I can see it. Okay. So he says, there's something in the air that could bring us all down. But if we stay in and stay safe, then we can bring it down. Stay inside, keep your hands clean. Only go out for shopping, watch Netflix, write a poem, use your sleeve for coughing. It may seem this virus will last forever, but that is not the case. If we play our part and keep apart, we can save the human race. There's something in the air that could bring us all down, but when we keep clean and keep apart, we can kick it out of town. So that's it for me. So thank you very much. I'll hand you over to Andy and Paul now.
That was brilliant, Darragh. Thank you so much for that. It was so nice to see all of the creative and different ways in which you kept all the service users engaged, occupied, motivated, and happy, I suppose, is the most important part. But we really appreciate your insights, and hopefully some people who are tuned in tonight will be able to get some inspiration if they find themselves in the same position where they're having to go back to the drawing board and come up with new and creative ideas just to get through the next 6 weeks.
Exactly.
We really appreciate that. So over to Andy and Paul now.
Hi folks, first of all, thanks very much for the invitation to present this evening. Thanks Darragh as well, that was a really good presentation, and I think it really shows, it's going to help, actually I'll be able to use some of your examples in the talk that we're doing now, because you have such really good examples about, we're going to talk about stress, but you also show that stress kind of channeled in the right direction can actually be a positive thing. And well done for all the creative and thinking off the seat of your pants, really, and involving people and looking at what has emerged from people in adversity. And I think that's a metaphor for life, really, isn't it? That it's how we respond really is so much determines how we're going to be affected by things. It's a lot of the stuff that we think is beyond our control is actually more within our control than we realize, and it can be empowering and enabling. And I think there's an element of that will be reinforced in the presentation that we do. While I'm setting that up, Andy, maybe you'd like to say something.
I mean, obviously, I mentioned to some of you before when, Darragh, we had a little bit of a glitch to do with the internet, but that's fine. I was a clinical psychologist at Gheel for many years, and I'm proud to be associated with the organisation. After listening to that, I'm even more proud of people being flexible and thinking out of the box. In Studio 3, for some of you who know of us, we are an international organisation. We have strong roots in Ireland, but also across the EU. Still do, no matter what Uncle Boris says in the future. Basically, our consulting organisation consults 50% with people across the spectrum with autism and age divides and other issues, complex trauma and other areas. We've shared a very similar thing here tonight, which is that the individuals that we advise people to support and also directly do have an awful lot of complex issues. And I would say over 2/3 to maybe 3/4 genuinely almost thrived in lockdown, like Darragh is attesting to here tonight. Thrived. The world became more predictable, as our colleague Peter McDonnell said. There was a liberation about that. Demands were reduced from staff, as Darragh said. But the other side of the coin is we do have a cohort of people, and I know Darragh would share that as well, who've really struggled even more so with lockdown. And I'm particularly worried about the uncertainties for the next 6 months. I mean, I live in the UK, don't need to say any more, do I? Where uncertainty is the rule book. Am I at level 1, level 2, level 3? Do I stand on my head? Do you wear a mask? Is it only on the Thursdays? The level of uncertainty created at the moment has a huge impact on the mental health of the people we support. So what Paul and I, my colleague, thought we'd do is give you a little presentation again of some of our experiences. And I'm relieved that Darragh went first in many ways. And I'm even more relieved that what we've done looks like it will complement this. So what it would suggest is, Paul, is you take a lead for this once. I'm going to prove to people that I don't have to talk all the time.
I don't mind if you do, Andy, honestly.
No,
really.
it's absolutely fine. So over to you, Paul, to start, and I'll chip in when you ask me to. And obviously we'll have time for questions at the end as well.
Thanks, Andy. I will be calling on you quite a bit.
That's right.
Again, I'm conscious of the time, and I'm conscious of how we could literally talk for hours about stress and well-being and how that impacts on behaviour and so on. But certainly it's normal and natural to feel stressed by COVID-19. And I suppose for each individual there is on this planet, there's different levels of how much that individual stresses about COVID-19. It's only natural and normal that we're going to have a whole spectrum, if you like, of how we're going to be impacted. Whether it's going to impact on us in a sort of a practical way on a daily basis, or whether it's something that we're going to actually ruminate or think about. But it is natural, it is normal. I think it's an important message to give to people, particularly who have autism, to let them know that if you are stressed by COVID-19, well, there's lots of valid reasons, first of all, to be stressed by COVID-19. It's nasty, it's dangerous, it's not good. And we wish it was gone, and we hope it will be gone soon and never to be seen again. But it is a reality, it is a risk, it is a threat. But we need to also try and keep, I suppose, our understanding of that level of threat at a level that's realistic as well, that you know, the risk is relatively low for each individual, but obviously we're going to take those safeguards. And I just love that poem at the end, Darragh. It was absolutely brilliant. Simple, but you know what, if everybody adhered to that very simple message, this COVID thing would have been kicked probably a long time ago, you know. Anyway, so it's natural, it's normal to be stressed regardless, but certainly about this bloody virus, you know. So as Andy said, there's kind of two different experiences. Some people have found it actually a little bit of a relief, and it was interesting, Darragh, again, your presentation kind of supported this notion that for many people, the restrictions and the close downs and the lockdowns and meant there was less stress and there was less pressure, not having to get up and go on buses and maybe go through long journeys through traffic, getting to centres and getting to services and having to cope with people and all that complexity. And for lots of people, their lives became much simpler, much more straightforward, much more controlled, less stressful, less challenging in many ways. But obviously long term, that's not in the person's best interests. But for some, it was actually almost like a welcome relief. And for lots of people on the autistic spectrum, we know they will appreciate people maybe not talking so much to them, or being in their physical space, or in crowded proximity, and having quieter social environments and so on. So for lots of people, again, without trying to sound patronizing about this, it actually may well have been something that suits them down to the ground in many ways. But for other people, then the experience, and maybe, and Andy, I know you have an example in terms of a particular family that you'll come to in a moment, but for many people, the loss of routine, the loss of predictability, and the loss of a lot of things that had a lot of meaning for them in their lives because they weren't able to participate. And then add to that all the fears and concerns about this virus, and we do know, and we are supporting, you know, and are very, very reluctant even to leave to catching the virus as well. And we're trying to counsel and support people around that I suppose to keep their concern commensurate with the level of risk that's actually out there. So it is a mixed bag, and it does kind of, like lots of things in this world, it does polarize in terms of how people have responded to it and how stressed they've become about it. So Andy, maybe this is one that you can just give the example.
I mean, this is just a real life quick example, and it's a family that I know personally who have twins, very different, as people say, one person on the spectrum. You met one person on the spectrum, but both these twins kind of like school. But the issue for us with COVID was the school was closed. And this was over in the UK. And we got slightly different responses from both twins. They both quite liked school, but one of them particularly, his own words, didn't like going to school for an hour and a half in a bus, which he referred to one of my colleagues as a washing machine on wheels. And he thrived when the school shut down. He did all his virtual online teaching he had to do, yet his brother struggled and started saying, I miss going to school, not just his friends, but actually going to school. He actually missed the journey. And we used them as an example because they have thrived well throughout COVID, but I use them as an example now because one of the things that has made it very difficult for all of us for the next 6 months is this thing about uncertainty on a month-by-month basis. I actually think what Ireland's done this week to be the first EU country to do another lockdown, I know there's lots of issues. From the people we support's point of view, it's very clear. You can plan with a rule like that. It's unclear, when I'm not being pejorative because this COVID thing is terrible, when you have so many different rules, it genuinely is confounding living over here at the moment. But as a plastic paddy, I wish I was back over in Mayo at the moment, to be perfectly honest. Life would be a lot simpler for lots of reasons. The only good thing I said that came out of the whole COVID experience was the fact that the Sam Maguire Trophy, we really, really can start thinking about the future rather than now. This idea about individual responses to stress and COVID, it is true. Darragh's examples are just so on the money about how people have had to be creative. One point I would make as well is we've had people who won't even go outside their front door using things like Zoom and Microsoft Teams are actually receiving stress management counseling online and really thriving on it, and that's something that's meant that we've had to be creative. Who says you've got to be sitting in a room 6 feet apart in a chair with a tweed jacket on to do therapy or counseling? There are no rules here. The rules are in our head. They're our restrictions a lot of the time. But back to Paul. I'll only butt in when you ask me to, Paul. So
okay,
go on again.
So anyway,
yeah,
and again, I'm conscious we have a fair few slides to go through, and I'm trying to keep it within the confines. So look, in Ireland, and Andy is right. We know now that we've got the lockdown for 6 weeks, and it's kind of in some ways back to square one for lots of people, and not so bad because we've had the prior experience of how to survive that, how to manage in all of that, and how to maintain our well-being and maintain our stress levels as best we can. And perhaps having done it before, it might be easier to do it a second time. And there's also this idea of resilience and developing and building resilience. And again, just going back to Darragh's talk, and also having trust and confidence in the resilience and flexibility of people as well, obviously with some degrees of support and planting the seeds of good ideas. But I think there's a point also we need to look at is about individualizing this as well in terms of our stress, and we'll talk about this idea of a stress signature. We're all affected different ways. We're all affected to different extents by different stressors in this world. There's no universal correct or incorrect stress response to COVID-19 or a stress response to going into lockdown. So many people are going to be affected in so many different ways. But even the more we talk about stress, the more we ask people to be more reflective and to look at their own stress levels themselves. Several important questions. How do you know when you're stressed? How stressed are you feeling, or how does stress affect you? And how do you know, and how tuned in are you to the effects of stress? And we would say for lots of people, actually, it's almost like an invisible thing. You don't sometimes realize how stressed you may well be, and unless you actually stop and take stock and take a self-check, if you like. The other thing is that we're going to talk about briefly is how stress really transacts we all interact with one another. We're not islands to ourselves, and we do get influenced and affected by the stress of others and how it impacts in a sort of transactional way from one person to another.
I think that's a key point, isn't it, Paul? That it's a very obvious point that stress is contagious. All emotions are. It's not just thinking about the stress of the people we support. We've had an awful lot of staff, and Darragh, I'm sure you'll share these experiences as well, who've been incredibly worried about COVID. They're worried about the kids at home. They're worried about other issues, and then they have to go into work. And I'll be honest, they're the real heroes in all of this, you know, to actually say, well, I've got to switch on and focus. So understanding stress to us is not just a cliche, it's the key. And I thought what we'd do, Paul, is if you go through those bits, those 10 useful tips at the end, we'll literally just do them quickly one at a time, because these are things we've done these slides that you can look at afterwards and feel free to take from them. So we're only going to talk to the main bullet points in the slide. So over to you again, Paul, talking about stress itself.
Yeah, so stress, anxiety and trauma have been proposed as potential significant factors and behaviours of concern of people with autism, and that's the study that backs that up. Basically, we think that underpinning, we talk about behaviours of concern, challenging behaviours, whatever term you want to put on that. Basically, we would say in most situations, it's highly implicated that the person is highly stressed when they engage in behaviours of concern. And it is also likely that we don't give enough credence to the fact that lots of individuals may have experienced trauma in their lives, and that they are having sort of like a post-traumatic stress reaction, which sometimes can seem that the person is overreacting to something quite simple. If we kind of go down a little bit under the surface, we're opening up that sort of trauma-informed approach. We believe is really, really important, because remember, people can be traumatized by what other people might think is very trivial or nothing at all. And I think lots of individuals with autism in particular can be a little bit more vulnerable to being traumatized by things that other people wouldn't give kind of recognition that, how could you be traumatized by that? It was only...
But it's also the coping strategies. The image I'm going to take away, apart from the songs tonight, is actually that image of a Big Mac made by a member of staff. Not for the other reasons. I've lost weight now, Darragh, so I'm not as big as I was, but it's more to do with how creative to think not having that burger in that wrapper is going to cause someone stress. Let's figure out a way around it. And I think that's just typifies to me when we're talking about the stress response, that it's actually about those simple things a lot of the time. Isn't it, Paul?
I mention it now because it kind of fits, and if I won't repeat the point later because but a lot of stress is really, really important in our lives. Sorry, not a lot of stress. Many of the stresses in our lives are not having a lot of stress all the time is not good, but many of the stresses that we're presented with are actually healthy and good for us. And it's almost like that which enables us to grow and develop. And again, fantastic examples again earlier on. From the people, and you'd swear we're a double act here, but seriously, it was the first time I heard the presentation, and it was really, really good concrete examples of, every time you're faced with somebody I want a Big Mac, I want a Big Mac, you're dealing with a stressed person, and you're dealing with stressed staff who are saying, oh God, what are we going to do? He's going to have a meltdown. He's going to be really in not good form, and God knows we could see another whatever. And just say, look, let's think outside the box. Let's be creative here. And lo and behold, what can be achieved. And I think it's coping, as we'll see, is also very, very important. It's transactional, but it's also about coping as well, and being creative, thinking outside the box, all that goes with that. So we also need to think about the stress of the carers and the supporters as well, and family members. And I just mentioned it now in case I forget. We have been spending a fair bit of time via Zoom and through parent training and reaching out to some families, and we're getting feedback from lots of families globally, actually, as it happens from our webinars. And it is another phenomenon, I think, and understandably so, that for many families, lockdown and not having access for their son or daughter to a day service or a school or whatever environment they would go, from the point of view of people being cooped up at home in close confines, and maybe if somebody have to stay at home and give up their job to mind people at home, that has been a huge stressor, and it has been probably in many cases pushed people to near to breaking point. And I think there's lots of people out there, in fairness, and maybe some tuned in tonight, who will be saying, gosh, they need a little bit more support, and stress is a big factor, and gosh, what are we going to face into now, between now and Christmas? And hey, are we going to even have Christmas as we know it? God knows. So if we're not minimizing here, but it is really good to see the positives, because I think positive psychology, like stress, can transact in a positive way as well. If we think of things, yes, we will get through this. And that was a beautiful message. We will get through this. We will come through the other side. And that's really important, even the first thing to say.
Yeah.
But there's lots of challenges between here and there. So many of the people we support are experiencing high levels of stress, and many of the supporters, the people who work with people who present with behaviours of concern, are also highly stressed. It, as we said, and I won't over egg this pudding, it transacts from one to the other quite a bit. So, and it becomes almost circular and increases because it has that circular. So, the other thing that we know from our training and research is that placing demands on people and staff or carers or people directly involved in a person's life, about 7 out of 10 times that people get highly stressed and start to behave in ways that we prefer they didn't, it's probably in a situation where they've been placed under a demand, or the stress is actually emanating from us towards the person. So we just need to be mindful of that. And is there a way that we can maybe reduce the stress for the person through reducing demands and being a little bit more flexible ourselves? As Andy says here, it's the client that gets the behaviour support plan. I think sometimes, and it's a big focus that we do, particularly in our Atlas training in Studio 3, is to focus on carer stress, carer fatigue, and carer well-being as much as it is the person we support, because one impacts so hugely on the other. You can't really separate them. And that's basically the transactional nature there. The other thing that we need to be aware of is what happens, like the whole, and we could spend an hour talking or more about what happens internally to our bodies when we are faced with stress or a stressing event or a stressor, and what happens internally in our bodies. And by the way, all of this is outside of our voluntary control. And if we feel a threat or a perceived threat, then our bodies respond. And it's like that fight or flight response kicks in, adrenaline, and we'll talk very little bit about cortisol, which is another hormone that the body produces when we're stressed, and that can really, if not kept in check, can cause lots of problems to us physically and psychologically. So we'll have a few little tips for you around maybe how to reduce that or manage that.
I'm just conscious, Paul, as you said, you've got the cortisol slide. The timing of this is that I think what we can do, because of Darragh's presentation, is if we can put more on these slides than you need, and they can go to anyone on this talk.
Right.
But the key points around stress management, which isn't the usual things you just read online, I think, Paul, if we went to those examples at the end, the 10 tips, because I think, we talk about individual stress signatures and coping. Cortisol is a stress hormone. To summarize these slides to everyone, my Paul goes to the next bit, is that cortisol makes you alert. Right? You secrete cortisol, not just adrenaline, but cortisol. High levels of cortisol means your sleep pattern goes, you feel fatigued, sometimes you don't have the energy to get out of bed in the morning. So we know this cycle is a real biological mechanism. And all I would say on that, and there's lots of literature we can give you as well, we're becoming much more knowledgeable as a group around how difficult these kind of issues are. Sometimes when you see people who are struggling, they haven't even got the energy to get through the day. So when we're talking about what we've been advising families, our own staff and colleagues, we've kind of got it down to some very simple points. And rather than, we won't go through all the slides, but we'll go through the headings. And the first one is always the same thing. You've got to manage your own behavior first. We're all good at saying it. Today, Paul and I were on a call. I nearly lost my head completely near the end of it. I've now accepted the feedback. I need to take a couple of days break, Paul. I take that on board. We're all fallible. Don't beat yourself up so much about that. When we say manage your own behavior first, it doesn't mean to say tear yourself apart if you're a parent or you're a carer or a supporter, that you're some kind of bad person, but you get stressed too. And part of acknowledging that is to admit it. You know, I'm smiling only because when I finished my last book on something called the low arousal approach, comments were made by people. Darragh Byrne might even be one of them as well, and a few others that were saying, you're one of the most fiery people we know talking about non-confrontation. And my answer is really simple. This sort of stuff is what I do with people who are distressed. The rest of you can go boil your head on a bad day. I'm as bad as the rest of you running around saying I can't cope. Seriously, COVID for us has been part of that. The key one, though, that psychologists don't emphasize enough is giving yourself time in slide 2. We don't. Yeah, making time to switch off as rather than switch on. And that's different for different people. We have a colleague of ours who's our business manager in Sweden who thinks switching off means sitting around a lake fishing. Now, to me or to Paul, that would be a living hell. But
no, I like that, Andy.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, walking up the Maynooth Canal as well, but it's his thing. And I think the thing is that you have to look at the individualized stress responses. They are unique to people. It's not all the same thing. We're not all going to do mindfulness, although it has a lot of benefit for a lot of people who get benefit from that. We're not all going to be into exercise and charging down the streets. So this bit about giving yourself some time and recognizing this, and a basic one at the end of this slide, which is common, I've learned from some colleagues of ours who are health psychologists, which is allow yourself time to eat and hydrate. When you're stressed, your hydration levels are really more important than at any other time. So we see it with individuals as well who have been stressed through COVID. You know, some of the advice we're giving people when we're consulting, it sounds like we're glorified doctors. Is he hydrating properly? Has he
I drink to that, Andy, by the way. Thank you. You just reminded me.
And there's a good analogy. You've got that, and I'm allowing myself a little bit of sugar here, Paul. You know, there's a free advert. You know?
No.
It's a health energy drink. So giving yourself time is critical. Similarly, with the next slide, what we're talking about, again, are very simple rules that they're different for different people. The key one is to choose strategies that work for you. As I said, we're working with our colleagues at the University of Northumbria. They call it the Stress Research Group. We've all collectively learned so much from these guys in the last 10 years. You know, there's a colleague of mine there, Mark Wetherall. There's another colleague, Professor Michael Smith, Dr. Michael Smith. The man is a human encyclopedia. I can ring him up and say, what's the literature or the research on the best ways to relax and get it out, tuned out with computers? Last week, I asked him about how do you recognize that computers are beneficial to some people when they're aroused in computer games? He sent me a pile of articles to make the case to say it's down to the individual. And I think you have to choose strategies that work for you. And even if it's only one strategy, within here, something you'll hear us all talk about a lot is the idea of a flow state where you literally can tune out. It's not about tuning in, as my colleague, the late Michael McCready used to say, who was one of Gheel's psychologists as well. It's about tuning out. It's how do you switch off? And it's not easy for people. You know, some people need to chant, listen to music. Some people need to play that computer game or shoot 15,000 people on Medal of Honor. The whole point about it is unique to people. But one little tip at the bottom that I actually recommended to somebody on the spectrum, but their parents said they started doing it, was to create a photo album of just positive visual images and flicking through them fast. When I'm feeling stressed, I'm going to flick through these images. Now, the person we designed it for, they did okay with it. They quite enjoyed it. But his mum said it was the greatest thing that had ever happened to her. And my colleague and I were on a Zoom call saying, this wasn't really meant to be for you though, was it? And she went, well, why not? We were embarrassed on the call thinking, yeah, why not? So she said, I've got 40 pictures in an album that are all memories that are positive for me and images and my favorite canal and everything else. And I just flicked through them all at the same time as my son. It helps her. Who am I to judge or who are we to judge? It works for someone. This idea that you've heard Paul say is that we have to understand that it's about emotions are contagious. Stress is contagious. Yeah. Also, modeling positivity is contagious. You know, just the image again of everything from a DJ to making burgers is again, I can't get that image out of my head. That's shared experience. When you see people coping is an emotion that's shared as well, or that pathway. So when you hear other people coping, it affects you. You think maybe I can do this as well. So part of this effect around stress is that it's not all good or bad, as Paul said, but we have to be clear that our coping responses are the most important. You can cope with an enormous amount of stress so long as you've got your own coping strategies. Sorry, as my colleague Michael McCready used to say, that are adaptive and functional. 15 pints of Guinness isn't necessarily always a positive coping strategy, just so we're clear. 10 maybe, 15, no way whatsoever. Similarly, the last few points, and we're going to rush through them to allow time for people's comments and questions. The key, and you saw it with Gheel, is cardiac exercise. There's a quotation from a book called The Real Happy Pill by a Swedish psychiatrist. It is an amazing book if you get to read anything about the benefits of exercise. And that's where one of the phrases that you've often heard a lot of the time comes from, which is, if exercise was a drug, it would be the most powerful drug on the planet, and we would be selling it very expensively. Cardiac exercise has such huge benefits, all forms of exercise, depending on your fitness level, for your mental health, your well-being, depression, a whole raft of things. But we still don't do enough of it. But I'm seeing more, and so's Paul and my colleagues and Darragh too, of people actually doing more exercise, not just becoming couch potatoes in COVID. It's a fantastic thing, absolutely fantastic. So this idea for yourselves as well is, if you're 90 years of age and you're a couch potato, a little bit of cardiac exercise over a 3-month period, you will see health benefits and physical well-being benefits. So if there's one key golden rule when people are confined, is to do this. I know somebody who's in a flat at the moment in London. They've got no garden. They've got no space to go out when they're in lockdown, but they got incredibly fit and they don't like exercise. They're a colleague. That's what they told me. I hate exercise. Now I kind of sort of like it. It helps me get my head clear in the day before I do the 15,000 Zoom calls. And that's another little factor for you, Darragh, and everyone else. The cognitive load of doing Zoom or online is twice the capacity of normal conversation. In some cases, if you do a multiple Zoom call with loads of faces, it can be 3 times. And that's from my colleagues at the University of Northumbria. So
does that mean you pay me twice as much, Andy, then?
Doesn't quite work that way, Paul, but we'll talk about that another time. It's a very interesting point you raised. Don't be a chancer. So the next slide after cardiac exercise is the core number one. It's hard not to take things personally. We've all done this, but we've all experienced people at the moment who are stressed, and they will say the most god-awful things at times. You know, you can turn around for every couple and family that's had a thriving, flourishing relationship. You can hear the neighbours next door. That's probably for another day, really. In this early lockdown period, I nearly wondered what the rules were. Should I go and bang on these neighbours' door across the road to say, we can all hear you? And by the way, breathe. I took the coward's way out in the end and just thought, I'll put some earplugs in instead. Nobody sounds to be like they're getting killed. But when the lockdown was partially over, one of these neighbours who I didn't know very well, I should say this, she's quite an elderly lady, and she said to me, there was one moment when my husband and I were having a bit of a dispute, nice word for it, but we noticed that yourself and your wife were almost outside your house. And I said, yeah, we were looking at the stars. We were stargazing. No, the truth was, we were thinking, what in the name of God, these 2 people are cooped up and they've actually had enough of each other. It's one of those nights. They're a loving couple, but we're all human. But the comments and remarks that people make, it's hard not to take them personally. We're helping somebody at the moment who's just put something out on social media. He's a guy with a diagnosis, and he's been absolutely attacked by some other individuals, cyberbombing, as they call it, the whole raft. That's how you pull together. So it was nice to tell him today that don't worry, the modest resources of Studio 3 will be backing you up. And there were 3 techies contacting you today, because it should never happen to you again like that. What you produced is fantastic. Don't let it spoil your day. To thine own self be true is probably the philosophy of the lot. It's not just quoting Shakespeare. You've got to be true to yourself. Our colleague David Petoniak is very clear in saying that you have to support the supporters. If we can't sort our own stuff out, we're no good for the people we're supporting. And it's not as corny as that. And as I said, if that's anything from a pint of Guinness to climbing a mountain to watching Netflix, most of you will realize now that Netflix box sets are now a phenomenon and the equivalent. You can't watch an episode, you dose yourself on 10. That's not a lot of people doing things like that, but they do it to tune out. I was asked the other day, is it harmful? It depends on whether it affects you and impacts you positively or negatively. It's down to you. If you want to watch the next 10 episode box set, do it. And just to finish with on this, we said the last tips is that we've got to stay connected with people. You know, we've had people joining things like Orkcraft and Minecraft and communities, and Darragh's pointed out other communities too, who wouldn't have joined them in the past. They wouldn't have thanked you for it. We've just recently at Studio 3, and I want to say this because it's confidential, we've actually agreed to fund a group called Swans in Scotland, which are a self-help organisation for young girls and adults with a diagnosis, females with a diagnosis. They do amazing work, but since this has happened and COVID, they've gone online. So we've actually agreed to fund them. Small amount of money, it's not a huge sum of money, so that they can run more online groups, some for people connected to us at Studio 3, but to others too. And it's about getting people together and feeling connected at times. I visited one of their calls. It was an absolute amazing thing. It takes an awful lot to shut me up, but I was genuinely at a loss for words. I felt humbled listening to the experience of the people there. And the last two slides from us are really just pejorative again, but they're very important. You know, as Paul said early on, it's a natural phenomenon. As my colleague Michael used to say, stressed is dessert spelt backwards. You've got to see the positive sides with it, you know. I'm not sure that I took the dessert thing the right way in my time. And finally, if you accept it's natural, it's all about your coping responses. You can cope with the weight of the world on your shoulders, but only if you have your own coping strategies. Even if it's that 10 minutes to just tune out yourself. Paul mentioned as a final point, we've been running free low arousal training for families, and anyone on this call, if you contact us, you can have those things. We are running some programs as well. One of our things for AsIAm is we're going to be doing some online training for trainers in people with a lived experience, particularly autism. And we're offering 6 complimentary places to AsIAm anyway. Look, we'll do more. The bottom line is that this social media world is about people sharing their experiences. So it's something we want to support. But what I would like to finish off, and something that Paul and I were discussing early on, is that you have to find your own path with this, and you don't have to say you're not stressed. If there's one thing we can say as a takeaway, be creative, be imaginative. Some of the things, Darragh, honestly, fantastic to hear that today. I cannot get that Big Mac out of my head, which is a worry. But I'd like us, unless Paul, if you've got any comments to finish, but obviously we'll take questions, but that kind of covers, I know we've gone through it quickly, but feel free. We're all part of the same community here. And I don't mean that as a cliche. And as a fully qualified plastic paddy, I've got to get that dig in there at the end, you know, go Mayo next year. We'll come again.
No, go Mayo in the next month. I'd say.
Yeah, I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced.
We will win in All Ireland, right? But there'll be always an asterisk beside it that it wasn't a real one, you know.
Well, an All Ireland with an empty, an All Ireland with an empty stadium, I would take in a heartbeat, and so would you. Yeah.
And no dub need comment now, Darragh. Okay, that's fine.
No other teams turning up. I take that as well. Anyway, but listen, we'll open it up for questions, and I obviously feel free to contact us outside of this as well, or if you, Fiona, and our colleagues at AsIAm or Gheel, if you need anything. Okay, seriously. So,
brilliant. Thank you so much, Andy and Paul. That was really interesting, and it was great how well each section of the talk actually complemented each other. And I know you said you're only going to pipe in every now and then, Andy, but I don't know. I think it was fairly 50-50 there. What do you think, Paul?
I'd never noticed, actually, no.
Sorry, Fiona. Paul is an employee of Studio 3. Did I pipe in?
No, not at all. Thank you for leaving it all to me, Andy.
But for those who know me really well, that was positively
job.
restrained. So, you know, by my standards. So anyway.
Thank you so much to both of you, and of course to Darragh as well. We haven't actually had any questions submitted into the box, which I think is a testimony to just how helpful and comprehensive both of your presentations were. So again, a massive thank you. We really, really appreciate you giving up. Oh, hang on, I'm seeing a couple of things popping in now. Oh, just people thinking, which is great. You did a fantastic job, and I mean, I certainly learned a lot. So I'm sure a lot of people who were tuning in tonight learned a lot as well. And just to remind everybody who's watching, if perhaps you only tuned in halfway through, or if you had to dip in and out, I know what it's like trying to feed the family and get kids to bed for school tomorrow and the rest of it. It will be available as a recording on YouTube. So we can, anybody who needs the link, it's just on our AsIAm YouTube, and send it to your friends or anybody who didn't get a chance to log in tonight, because as I said, it was massively helpful, and we really, really appreciate the time that you gave us tonight. So thanks a million.
You're very welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, all right, thanks guys.
Delighted
Absolutely
to be
fabulous.
able to present. Thank you.
I'll get that image of that burger homemade out of my head in the next year.
Go to McDonnell.
Wow.
God.
No, it's full of COVID. I'm not going there. What are you on about?
Can't say that.
They fire it out through the window. Yeah, it's all fine. Yeah, I might later, actually. You primed me with that. I knew I was getting hungry. But thank you again. It's been an honour. And it's great to catch up with you again as well, Darragh. And
you too, Andy, as always.
And we'll...
Cheers, Darragh.
Absolutely fantastic. So, pleasure.
Thanks so much, everybody.